Hello. As promised, in the last vid I went over what they have changed. In this one I will go over my recommended builds for 0.6.0, supposing they keep everything exactly the same. These things are of course subject to change, that's why they were on the testing server to begin with. Anyway, let's start off with the Shimakaze. On the Shimakaze, my absolute first perk will be Preventive Maintenance, to reduce the chance of your torpedo tubes being broken, because of course I run the module that increases the risk of them being incapacitated in return for getting faster reload. So this one pretty much counters that issue pretty nicely. Last stand, torpedo armament expertise for faster reload, stealth. And at this point, after I have gotten stealth, I would get RPF. This is so good for actively avoiding enemy DDs, countering enemy DDs, playing around them, and always having like an idea of where the closest threat is and playing around it. Such a strong perk for all DDs, and especially if the enemy DD is using RPF, you kind of need to use it yourself to be able to actively counter it. Once you have this, the 18th perk point goes to Survivability Expert, so you get some additional tankiness. And then finally, Priority Target is pretty useful for knowing how many people are shooting at you, because you might not always see the need to smoke up, but if this Priority Target is telling you that, well, 5 people are aiming at you, it's probably a good idea to blast that smoke regardless. Moving on, the gearing, you might see very similar things here. Preventive Maintenance and Priority Target once again, Last Stand. Naturally, here instead of Torpedo Reload, I am in fact running Superintendent, because the smokes on the gearing are of course so fantastically good that I like having an additional smoke on it instead. Concealment Expert, RPF, and of course Survivability Expert. Very similar builds here. Khabarovsk, once again, very similar builds. Here the change comes, instead of using either of those two, I'm using the basic firing training for the faster reload, and of course the better AA it also gives. Stealth, RPF, instead of tankiness though, I have chosen advanced firing training. Now there is some argument here to be done about running, instead of stealth, running the survivability perk. I've been testing them both, and ultimately I feel like Concealment Expert gives you more effective HP than the raw buff of Survivability Expert does. If I had to describe it, I would say that this is a direct buff to survivability, and this is an indirect buff to survivability, because you have slightly better stealth and easier to pick your fights, easier to disengage, and so forth. Which one of these are truly superior? Well, it's hard to tell from only testing on PTS, and there's possibilities I might still be tweaking this build. But so far I've actually been enjoying the stealth, because it does bring the stealth on this one down to 7.9 again, and it's kind of nice to not be spotted across the map and actually being able to see stuff like enemy Royal Navy cruisers before they can see you. Z52, similar builds once again, and these two I like these two so much on DDs. I found them very useful. Last Stand, Superintendent of course for additional hydro, not just additional smoke. Concealment Expert, Radio Positioning Finder, and Advanced Firing Training. Now the reason of course is you can get detectability down to 6.4 on the C52, which makes you quite competitive with enemy DDs, and with the help of RPF and radar, well of course you have quite an easy time of hunting them down and in general knowing exactly where they are. So that's the build I have enjoyed on this one. Let's move on to cruisers. We have the Zao. Once again, Preventive Maintenance. Well, actually, sorry, my bad. My first perk here is absolutely, without a doubt, Direction Center. Zao is of course one of those that can launch a fighter plane, and trust me when I say, when you can launch a fighter plane, you really want to use Direction Center. It's so good to have that additional fighter up. It gives you so much more cover against planes and against DDs. It's just a great perk. Second point, Expert Marksman. Here I get both Superintendent for the additional heal and additional fighter, of course, not as important as the heal. Demolition Expert, yes, it's only 2%, but it's also only 3-point perks, and fires are still your bread and butter when it comes to dealing damage with the Zao, so I recommend getting it regardless. Finally, Stealth, and in this case, Advanced Firing Training to increase your AA range. And the last two perks go into Preventive Maintenance and priority target. If you're spotted, most of the time you enjoy, of course, stealth firing, but when it comes times to push in, it's good to know how many people are actually aiming at you, because in the ZOW you end up giving quite a lot of broadside if you want to fire all your guns. Now, you can actually make the ZOW quite a nasty anti-air cruiser in this patch. The thing here is that you can, if you give up, for example, Demolition Expert and Preventive Maintenance, you can instead get Manual Fire Control. And combining Manual Fire Control with your 7.2 km range AA, that already does 175 DPS, means that you can become quite a anti-air monster on the ZOW, in fact. So that option exists. This patch has actually made the ZOW anti-air significantly stronger, since you can get that triple X4 build, well, in this new patch, triple X4 build, which is surprisingly strong. So if you have issues with all the carriers, or you queue up with carriers, giving up Demolition Expert for this is certainly a viable option. Des Moines. On Des Moines, of course, you have no fighter planes, so there's no point using Direction Center. First perk here is prevent, well, actually, it's pretty much a tough one which one we want to take first. Both are really good. I'd say Preventive Maintenance, because you tend to lose turrets quite a bit on the Des Moines. Expert Marksman, Superintendent, Stealth, Concealment Expert, and then I pick RPF. The reason I pick it on the Des Moines is you tend to do a lot of close quarters fighting in the Des Moines. You kind of want to get close, you want to push into caps. You fight DDs a lot, and the additional information from RPF is fantastically important on the Des Moines. So absolutely recommended on any Des Moines build. And the last 4 points go into advanced firing training, or well, 18th point goes here, and then you can put the last one into either of these two, depending on which one you didn't pick. AFT, of course, to increase the range of your AA to 7.2 km, so if you do pop defensive AA, you have incredible range. Here you can see I'm not recommending Demolition Expert, because I feel like there are better options available. Moskva. Here we see I go for the, once again, fairly similar so far, but I go for the 3x4 build. The Moskva can get absolutely disgusting anti-air. You can reach 8.2 km, and with both manual AA and AFT, popping your defensive AA with this build, you become this massive anti-air bubble. In the past, you had to give up a lot to be able to achieve this build, but now you can also use stealth while using this build. So you got excellent concealment while still having excellent anti-air, and of course being a monster from long range. I do not recommend RPF on the Moskva, because you're rarely close enough to actually effectively make use of it, and most of the time you know when to use your radar without needing RPF for it. Once again, some options here. If there's a complete carrier drought or something similar, there's potential for this build to change, but we'll see how the meta changes. I do, however, expect that there's already quite a few, very few carrier players, and this patch doesn't exactly help carriers, so the carrier population might drop even more, which might make builds which invest this many points into anti-air less useful. That remains to be seen, however. Hindenburg, I've had some issues, or actually I did eventually find a build that I enjoy. First of all, you can have a fighter plane, so that means Direction Center, Expert Marksman, Superintendent. Here I go full AA build and concealment, just like on the Moskva, but the difference is here I'm actually able to run the German hydroacoustic search. Now, the reason for this is I consider that I gain so much anti-air from having both manual AA and AFT and the range module on AA on my ship. I gain so much anti-air from this that I don't need defensive AA to defend myself against planes. So I can in fact run hydroacoustic search, which makes the Hindenburg, well, once again, kind of a jack of all trades, master of none, but if you manage to push him close enough to make your Hydra effective against DDs, well, you are going to be quite strong indeed. The last perk point I put into priority target, because I really enjoy having this one on cruisers. It's been such a useful perk. Minotaur, here once again, quite like on the Des Moines. Well, here we see some differences. First of all, preventive maintenance or priority target, both are fantastic. Jack of all trades, reduce the reload of both your heal and your smoke, and your hydro. You have so many consumables that this one is fantastic for you. You don't need a turret reverse because your turrets turn so quickly. Superintendent, additional, well, you see what the consumables you get, very useful. Stealth, manual AA, and RPF. Once again, just like with the Des Moines, where you tend to get close in, fight and brawl and battle with them, I consider having RPF to be extremely valuable and, well, almost necessary. Not quite, but very, very useful in angling against incoming torps from DDs and other things. So RPF, fantastic on both the Minotaur and the Des Moines, not that recommended on the others. Right, let's move on to the battleships then. Yamato, I actually run a different build than on any of the other battleships. I've gone for a full tank build on the Yamato, and I've actually quite been enjoying that. First of all, direction center to counter all those, well, because you can send up a fighter plane. It's really that simple. I already explained how good it is. Expert marksman, and here I go for a lot of tier 3 perks. First of all, the fire prevention. I've noticed that in the Yamato, when you angle, you tend to sit angled in against the enemies a lot more than in any other battleship. And in the Yamato in particular, eliminating the chance to get set 2 fires on the superstructure, meaning you can only have 1 fire on this entire area, means that the max fires I tended to eat was 1 on the bow and 1 on the superstructure. And they struggled so hard to even get that 3rd fire on the back of my ship. So I found this perk to be very strong on the Yamato, especially because of how much time you spend angled in. And even with my reload or repair on cooldown, eating 2 fires wasn't really the end of the world, and it was quite humorous to watch it. In that sense, that's the reason why I also have basics of survivability, reduce that fire chance and that duration, or reduce that fire duration even further. Superintendent, must have on battleships in my opinion, that additional heal. Vigilance, warning for those torpedoes, and finally stealth. I don't go for any anti-air builds here. Once again, I don't really see anti-air builds being that popular, and I feel like I felt tankier in this build. I felt so tanky in this build that I didn't want to give it up just for the sake of potential carrier plays happening. So this was my tanky Yamato build, you might call it. Montana. Sadly, the Montana feels much the same as it did on live right now, meaning it still doesn't feel quite up to the other T10 battleships. However, of course, fighter plane, expert marksman, superintendent, vigilance to warn you of torps, stealth, highly recommend stealth build, AFT to increase the range of your anti-air, and of course your secondaries, and finally high alert. This combination makes you fairly tanky against torps. You have the stealth, you have some plane protection. It's kind of continuing that jack of all trades. And unlike the Yamato, where you kind of sit still and you eat a lot of damage, you of course spend a lot more time moving in the Montana. And the high alert combined with the flag, if you run this flag, which you get from November Foxtrot, means that you actually get a pretty feisty consumable time, 68-second repair timer. So the default one, if you run a stock repair, is something like 120 seconds, but if you run a premium repair and you run these consumables, you can get it down to 68 seconds, which is quite strong, and I felt that it has been the most fitting build I have found for the Montana. Of course, if you queue up with a carrier a lot, then you can probably give up. You can give up high alert and maybe vigilance and get manual AA instead, and so forth. But that's of course if you queue up with a carrier. That will naturally change builds a lot if you happen to do that. Große Kurfürst. Now the German battleships are the ones that are probably benefiting the most from this patch. Mostly because, well, you can probably, starting off we have the same usual direction center, expert marksman, a superintendent. The reason why German battleships benefit so much is they got so many options. You can run manual AA, manual secondaries, manual AA and AFT, or you can run stealth, advanced firing training, and manual secondaries. Once again, in this build it comes probably a lot down to how many carriers you face. I don't think there will be too many carriers on live, hence why I prefer the stealth build, because I feel like this reduces more damage than the manual AA one does. But if you end up facing a lot of carriers, giving up stealth and getting both manual AA and manual secondaries is pretty damn nasty, because of course if you otherwise spec for, if module wise you otherwise spec for the secondaries here, you don't need to go main batteries. Of course you go main batteries, you don't go secondaries here, you keep it main battery to keep the utility, but you go for the range and reduce dispersion and of course the survivability. That means you still have a 10.6 km range on your secondaries, while at the same time still having really strong main guns. So the Grosse Kurfürst, you can play it normally at range, 13.6 km stealth, you can duke it out, and then later on when it comes down to brawling, you can push in with your manual secondaries, and you kind of get the best of both worlds. So on PTS I've seen a lot of German battleships, and it's probably for a good reason, because this patch really favors the German high tier battleships. The Bismarck, of course, is another ship that's probably going to run something, instead of stealth, the Bismarck will probably run manual fire control, but otherwise fairly similar build, and that's going to be extremely nasty to deal with as well, because the Bismarck already has great anti-air, but now it gets fantastic anti-air and secondaries and all of these other things. Of course, you will probably see a similar build here on the North Carolina, where on the North Carolina you run AFT, manual secondaries and stealth. So you get great stealth and great anti-air on the North Carolina, so that one's probably going to be really nasty as well. In general, a common trend here is most ships gain really good anti-air and battleships gain a lot of great builds, but the one class that really is feeling it is the carriers. God damn, are they feeling it. Let's see if I can max out this captain here. So Hakuryu wise, well, I've gone for the default carrier build, which is aircraft servicing, torpedo acceleration, torpedo armament, air supremacy, and it's kind of like, yeah, dogfighting, demolition, and what more. I mean, I guess you could get stealth to just become really hard to find. 11.5 km stealth on a carrier is pretty nasty, like pretty insane. Unlikely anyone will find you. Combine that with, let's say, maybe preventive maintenance. Actually, at this, yeah, there's no point getting anything else. This one would be a potential build. On the Midway, I went of course for the same thing here, but instead of after going concealment expert on Midway is, by the way, fantastic. Instead of that default 16 km stealth where you get spotted across the map, you can reduce it to 13.5. But after that I've just gone for manual fire control, because of course the AA on your big guns is 200, so buffing that with manual AA means you're extremely hard to strike out by the enemy carrier, even if you don't have defensive AA on. So defensive in that way, but ultimately both these new perks, emergency takeoff and evasive maneuver, I think they're both shit, and ultimately, besides making it easier to get stealthier builds, this patch doesn't really add much to carriers, and I think we're going to be seeing that in the amount of players we'll be seeing in the future. Anyway, those were my recommended builds for all the ships in the game so far. I can't actually have any premium ships on this PTS server yet, so when it comes to making a more updated guide featuring premium ships, I'll be doing that if and when this patch hits live. If it hits live completely unchanged, well, then you'll be seeing a follow-up. If things are changed, then I will of course address that issue. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a nice rest of the day.